The banging on my door didn't sound like a friendly neighbor or a delivery driver running late. It sounded like authority wrapped in metal knuckles, the kind that doesn't care if you're still in your pajamas or if your heart is racing. I jolted awake in my bed, my pulse already hammering against my ribcage before my mind could catch up. For a second, I couldn't remember what day it was or why the room felt so heavy with dread. Then I saw the pale morning light creeping through the curtains and the digital clock glowing on my nightstand. 6:15 in the morning. My mouth felt dry, like I had swallowed sand in my sleep. I pulled a hoodie over my tank top and stepped carefully into the hallway, moving quietly out of habit, like the floorboards might snitch on me for existing. The pounding came again, harder this time, followed by a deep male voice that made my stomach drop. "Sheriff's Department, open up." My hands went ice cold in an instant. I didn't run to the door. I didn't freeze either. I moved with the kind of control you learn when panic has burned you before, when you know that losing your composure gives other people exactly what they need to paint you as the problem. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. A uniformed officer stood on my front step, badge gleaming under the yellow bulb, one hand gripping a stack of official-looking papers. Behind him, his patrol car sat silent at the curb, no flashing lights, like he had decided not to wake the entire neighborhood just yet. Then I saw them. Across the street, standing near the corner like spectators at some twisted performance, were my parents. My mother had her arms crossed over her chest, her expression calm and satisfied. My father stood with his hands buried in his jacket pockets, his face unreadable, but his posture screaming ownership. They weren't shocked to see a sheriff at my door. They looked like they had been waiting for this moment. I unlocked the door, but kept the chain latched. The officer looked at me with the kind of tired professionalism that comes from delivering bad news too many times. "Ma'am, are you Isabel Monroe?" he asked. "Yes," I answered. My voice came out steady because I refused to let it crack. He glanced down at the papers in his hand. "I'm Officer Daniels with the County Sheriff's Office. I'm here to serve a writ of restitution. It's an eviction notice." The word eviction slammed into me like a fist to the chest. But I kept my face still. "This is my house," I said quietly. "There must be some kind of mistake." Officer Daniels didn't argue. He had probably heard that line 1,000 times and hated what usually followed. "Ma'am, I'm not here to discuss ownership. I'm here to enforce a court order." My name was printed across the top in bold black ink, like I was some tenant who had skipped out on rent, not the woman who had painted these walls, fixed the leaking faucet in the kitchen, and planted rose bushes in the front yard with my grandmother when I was 16. My mother's voice carried across the street, loud and syrupy. "You should have listened when we tried to talk to you, Isabel." My father's voice followed, flat and final. "Get your things. This is happening today." Officer Daniels' eyes flicked toward them, then back to me. His voice dropped just slightly. "Ma'am, do you have somewhere you can go?" The question wasn't kindness. It was procedure, but it still made my throat tighten. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Not until you show me what this actually is." He lifted the top page and angled it so I could read through the narrow gap in the door. There it was, printed in bold letters. A case number beneath it, a court seal stamped in blue. A judge's signature I didn't recognize scrawled at the bottom. My pulse tried to spike. I forced it back down. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't ask my parents why, because I already knew. They didn't need a reason that made sense to anyone but themselves. They just needed a reason that sounded legitimate enough to fool a courthouse. I pointed to a line near the top of the page. "Who filed this case?" Officer Daniels followed my finger. He hesitated, just long enough that I knew the answer was going to hurt. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "the plaintiff listed here is—" He trailed off, looked back at the paperwork, then at me again. His expression shifted. Not shock, not pity. Recognition. Like someone had just realized the monster was standing in plain sight. He cleared his throat. The case was filed by Margaret Monroe and Vincent Monroe. My parents didn't even flinch. My mother lifted her chin like she was proud. My father's jaw stayed locked. I felt something go very still inside me. A cold, clear stillness. because if my parents were the plaintiffs, that meant they hadn't just threatened me. They had walked into a courthouse, stood in front of a clerk, and turned themselves into the reasonable party in this story. I kept my voice even. When was this case filed? Officer Daniels checked the page again. Judgment was entered last Thursday. Last Thursday. My mouth went dry. I had been here last Thursday. I had gone to work, come home, made dinner, watered the plants, gone to bed. I hadn't been to court. I hadn't received any summons, no officer at my door, no certified letter, no notice taped to my window. Where was I served? I asked. Officer Daniels looked down, and this time his pause was heavier. He ran his thumb along a section of the document, scanning. Service address listed as 472 Elmwood Drive. I didn't answer right away, because my brain was already rejecting what I had just heard. Elmwood Drive wasn't my address. It wasn't even close. It was the tiny duplex my parents had rented over a decade ago, before they bought a bigger place on the other side of town. The place with the cracked front steps and the mailbox that hung sideways, a place I hadn't stepped foot in since I was in high school. That's not my address, I said calmly. That's not where I live. Officer Daniels' jaw tightened slightly. He didn't say, I know. He said, it's what's listed on the proof of service. My mother called out again, her voice dripping with false concern. We tried to do this the right way, Isabel. You left us no choice. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Officer Daniels. Can I see the proof of service? He flipped back a page, carefully, like he knew this mattered. Ma'am, I can show you what I have here. He tilted the document so I could read it through the gap. A line stating that service had been completed, a signature, a date, a timestamp, and a description that made my skin prickle with cold anger. Substitute service accepted by adult occupant at 472 Elmwood Drive. Adult occupant. At Elmwood Drive. My parents had listed an address they controlled, claimed someone had accepted legal papers on my behalf, and the court had believed them. I slowly turned my head and looked across the street. My mother stared back at me with a calm, rehearsed expression, like she had already planned every word she would say if someone asked. And in that moment, I understood exactly what this eviction was really about. It wasn't just about humiliating me. It was about rushing me, forcing me to panic, to pack, to leave, to lose control of the house before I had time to fight back. Because if I didn't get a judge to stop this, a sheriff's deputy would legally remove me from the home my grandmother had left to me. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice low and controlled. This house belonged to my grandmother, I said to Officer Daniels. She left it to me in her will. Officer Daniels didn't argue. He just held the papers a little tighter, like he hated being the delivery system for someone else's cruelty. Ma'am, if you believe this court order was obtained improperly, you need to contact the courthouse immediately and file an emergency motion. I can't advise you on how to do that. I nodded once. I understand. He glanced down at the writ again, then back up at me, and his voice became even more careful. There's one more thing, he said. This writ authorizes same-day possession. My stomach clenched. Same day. He looked me straight in the eye, professional, but not unkind. Without a judge's order stopping this, he said, I'm required to clear this property by 2 o'clock this afternoon. I didn't stand there and argue with a sheriff's deputy on my own doorstep. Arguing would have given my parents exactly what they wanted, a scene, a story, a reason to tell people I was unstable. So I did the only thing that actually mattered. I documented everything. I asked Officer Daniels to hold the paperwork steady while I took clear, detailed photos of every single page, the case number, the court seal, the judge's signature, the service address, the proof of service language, the timestamp. Then I stepped back inside, closed the door gently, and turned the deadbolt like it could somehow buy me a few more minutes. It couldn't, but documentation could. Through the front window, I could still see my parents standing across the street, watching like vultures waiting for roadkill. My mother had that same smug stillness she always wore when she thought she had cornered me into obedience. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me move. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, my phone, and one small fireproof lockbox from the drawer where I kept the things that become life or death when other people decide to get creative. My deed, my grandmother's will and probate paperwork, my property tax receipts, my homeowner's insurance policy in my name. Then I called the courthouse while I was still standing in my own kitchen. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. Civil Division. I need to file an emergency stay for an eviction, I said, keeping my voice calm and clear. I was never properly served. There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking, the kind of pause that meant she had pulled up my case and was deciding how much help the system was willing to offer at 6:30 in the morning. What's your case number? She asked. I read it off the document. She typed again, longer this time. Then her voice changed, just slightly. Less scripted. Ma'am, she said, this is a restitution writ filed by Margaret and Vincent Monroe. Default judgment was entered last week. I was never served, I said again. The address listed is wrong. That's not where I live. Another pause. More typing. I see the service return, she said carefully. It states substitute service was accepted by an adult occupant. That would be my mother, I said, and I kept my voice even because if I let the anger take over, I would waste time I didn't have. What do I need to do right now? You need to file an emergency motion to stay enforcement, she said, and a motion to set aside the default judgment. How quickly can that be heard? I asked. She hesitated. It depends on the judge's availability. It has to be today, I said. The officer told me he has to clear the house by 2 this afternoon. The clerk exhaled quietly, like she didn't like what she was about to say, but she was going to say it anyway. Come to the courthouse as soon as we open at 8, she said. Bring identification. Bring proof of your actual address. Bring any evidence you have that you were not properly served. And if you have proof that you own this property, bring that too. I have all of it, I said. Good, she replied. And ma'am, don't waste any time. If the writ is executed, everything becomes much harder. Harder meant the kind of harder that financially destroys people and then calls it procedure. I ended the call, grabbed the lockbox, and walked back to my front door. Officer Daniels was still standing on my porch, waiting with the patience of someone who had done this too many times. My parents were still across the street, unmoving. I opened the door again, still keeping the chain on. I'm going to the courthouse right now, I told him. I'm filing an emergency stay. He nodded once. That's what you need to do, ma'am. My mother called out, her voice sweet as poison. You can file whatever you want, Isabel. It's already over. Officer Daniels' jaw tightened at her tone, but he didn't respond to her. Ma'am, he said quietly, I'm not allowed to give you legal advice, but I can tell you this. If you get a signed stay order from a judge, you call the Civil Enforcement Unit immediately. They'll contact me and instruct me not to proceed. I understand, I said. Can you give me that number? He hesitated for just a second, then pulled a card from his pocket and wrote a phone number on the back. He slid it toward the crack in the door. My father finally spoke again, louder this time. Pack your things, Isabel. Don't make this uglier than it has to be. I met his gaze across the street and kept my voice quiet and steady. You already made it ugly, I said, when you lied to a court. My mother's face tightened, but she smiled anyway, like she thought my words didn't matter anymore. I closed the door without giving them another word. Then I left through the back door, walked around the side of the house, and got into my car without having to walk past them, like they owned the street. On the drive to the courthouse, the sky brightened into that pale morning blue that makes everything look deceptively peaceful. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. My mind was not. I kept thinking about Elmwood Drive, about my parents accepting service for papers that were meant for me, about how easily a lie becomes a legal judgment when you don't know you're supposed to show up and defend yourself. When the courthouse opened at 8, I was already standing outside the front doors. The building smelled like floor cleaner and burnt coffee. The security guard at the metal detector looked half asleep until I set the eviction paperwork on the tray and said, I have a writ being executed today. He waved me through faster than anyone else in line. Upstairs, the civil division counter had a small line of people, clutching folders like lifelines. I waited without fidgeting, because every movement felt like it could be misinterpreted. When I reached the window, I slid my ID and the photos of the writ forward. "I need to file an emergency stay and a motion to set aside the default," I said. "I was never properly served. The service address is wrong." The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and reading glasses on a chain, typed in my case number and frowned almost immediately. "You're listed at this address?" she asked, reading from the screen. "No," I said. "That's my parents' old rental. I've never lived there as an adult." She clicked again, pulled up a scanned document, and turned her monitor slightly so I could see. A proof of service form. A description of the so-called adult occupant who had allegedly accepted the papers. My stomach turned. The signature was a messy scrawl, but the printed name underneath was clear as day. Margaret Monroe. My mother hadn't even tried to hide it. "She signed for the service," I said quietly. The clerk's eyebrows lifted slightly. "She's listed as the plaintiff." "Yes," I said. "And she accepted service on my behalf, at an address I don't live at." The clerk stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. Then she did something that told me she wasn't just going through motions. She printed the service form and slid it under the glass toward me. "Highlight that," she said in a low voice. "It matters." I took the paper with hands that refused to shake. "I also own the house," I said. I slid the deed copy across the counter, along with my grandmother's will and the probate distribution order. My grandmother's name at the top. My name listed as the sole heir to the property. The clerk looked at the deed and blinked. Then she typed faster. "Your parents filed this as landlords," she said, her voice tight. "They're claiming you're a tenant who refused to leave." "A tenant," I repeated flatly. She clicked to another scanned document and turned the monitor again. A rental agreement. 1 page. My name typed at the top. My parents' names listed under landlord. A signature at the bottom that was supposed to be mine. It wasn't. It looked like someone had tried to forge my handwriting from memory and gave up halfway through. "They forged it," I said. The clerk didn't say yes. Clerks aren't allowed to say yes. She said, "If you want a judge to see this today, you need to file your emergency motion immediately. I can give you the forms." She handed me a thick packet through the slot, pages still warm from the printer. "Emergency motion to stay enforcement," sat at the top in bold letters. "What judge is assigned?" I asked. She checked the screen. "Judge Callahan." "Can I get in front of her this morning?" The clerk hesitated, then glanced over her shoulder, toward a door marked "Judicial Staff Only." "I can try," she said. "But you need to understand the time constraints here." "I understand," I said. "If I don't get a stay, a deputy removes me from my own house by 2 this afternoon." The clerk nodded once, almost imperceptibly. She took my packet back and stamped it hard. The sound echoed. Thunk. Official, real. She slid the stamped motion back to me. "Go to courtroom 6, she said. "Ask the assistant for an emergency hearing slot." I turned to leave, but she added, quieter this time, "Miss Monroe." I looked back. She nodded toward the deed in my hand. "If that deed is legally recorded in your name, your parents' eviction case has a serious standing problem. Judges do not like standing problems." I thanked her, like she had handed me a loaded weapon. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. In the hallway outside courtroom 6, I sat on a hard wooden bench and filled out the emergency motion with careful, deliberate handwriting. Not rushed, not shaky, every line intentional. When I reached the section asking for supporting evidence, I listed exactly what the record already showed. Incorrect service address. Plaintiff signed the proof of service. Forged rental agreement. Deed recorded in my name. Then I stood and walked to the assistant's window and slid the packet under the glass. The assistant read the first page, then the second. Her eyes stopped on the proof of service. Not dramatically, just alert. She looked up at me. "You're saying the plaintiff accepted service on behalf of the defendant? Yes, I said. She stared at me for a long second, then stood without another word, and disappeared through the door behind her. I waited, hands folded, breathing steady, listening to muffled voices coming from inside the judge's chambers. When the door opened again, the assistant returned, holding my packet like it suddenly weighed more. She leaned toward the window and spoke quietly. "Judge Callahan will see you," she said. "But I need to warn you about something. Your parents submitted another document with their original filing, and if it's legitimate, this isn't just about an eviction anymore." My stomach tightened. "What document?" The assistant swallowed. "A deed," she said. "A recorded deed claiming the house was transferred back to them." My body went cold, but my face stayed perfectly still. "A deed," I repeated softly. "Claiming it was transferred back to them." The assistant nodded, her eyes cautious. "It's in the court file as an exhibit. You'll see it when you're in front of the judge." I didn't argue in the hallway. I didn't demand to see it right then, like someone unraveling. I simply nodded and said, "Thank you." Then I followed her through the door into courtroom 6. The room was smaller than I expected. Dimmer, quieter, built for decisions that destroy people politely. A few attorneys sat scattered in the gallery, with laptops open. A man in a wrinkled shirt stared at his hands, like he was waiting to be sentenced. And then I saw my parents. They were seated near the front, flanked by their attorney. A man with silver hair and an expensive suit. The kind of lawyer people hire when they want to look like the reasonable party. My mother wore a soft sweater and a concerned expression, like she had come here to save me from myself. My father stared straight ahead, stern-faced. They didn't look nervous, they looked prepared. When my mother saw me, she gave a small, sad smile, like she was performing compassion. I didn't return it. The bailiff called the case number, and we all stood and approached the tables in front of the judge's bench. Judge Callahan entered and took her seat. She looked down at the file in front of her, with a frown that told me she had already seen something she didn't like. "Good morning," she said. "We have an emergency motion to stay enforcement of a writ of restitution. Ms. Monroe, you're the defendant in this case." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "And you're appearing without an attorney today." "Yes." Her gaze flicked briefly to my parents' lawyer. "Counsel Richard Hastings for the plaintiffs, Your Honor," he said smoothly. Judge Callahan nodded, then looked back at me. "Miss Monroe, you understand that this writ authorizes possession of the property today?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "The officer told me 2 o'clock this afternoon." Judge Callahan didn't react to the emotion behind that statement. She reacted to the procedure. "Tell me why I should issue an emergency stay." I slid my packet forward, keeping my hands steady. "Because I was never properly served, Your Honor. The proof of service shows that the plaintiff accepted substitute service at an address where I do not live. The address listed is not mine, and the plaintiff signed the service form herself." Judge Callahan's eyes narrowed slightly. "The plaintiff signed the service form?" Mr. Hastings smiled faintly, like he was about to explain away a minor technicality. Judge Callahan looked at him. "Counsel, is that accurate?" Mr. Hastings stood, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, service was completed in accordance with the statute. Substitute service is permitted under the law. The occupant at the address accepted the papers." Judge Callahan raised one hand. "Don't recite statutes to me, counsel. Answer the question. Did your client sign the proof of service as the adult occupant who accepted papers on behalf of the defendant?" Mr. Hastings hesitated. Then he chose his words very carefully. "Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Monroe accepted service at the address listed in the complaint as Miss Monroe's last known residence." Judge Callahan's gaze snapped back to me. "Is Elmwood Drive your last known address?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "I haven't lived there since I was a teenager. My driver's license, tax records, and utility bills all show my current address." I slid my ID and a recent utility bill forward. Judge Callahan scanned them quickly. Then she looked directly at my mother. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, "why did you accept service on behalf of the defendant at an address that is clearly not her current residence?" My mother's lips trembled into a practiced expression of sorrow. "Your Honor, she began softly. We've tried everything. She's been so difficult. She stopped responding to us. We didn't know what else to do. There it was. The label. Difficult, a word designed to make the court stop asking uncomfortable questions. Judge Callahan didn't even blink. That's not an answer, she said. Did you know where your daughter actually lived? Or didn't you? My father leaned forward slightly, his voice low and controlled. We were trying to protect the property, Your Honor. Judge Callahan's eyes stayed sharp. Protect it from whom? My father didn't answer. My mother lowered her gaze like a martyr. Mr. Hastings stepped in quickly. Your Honor, the plaintiffs are the rightful owners of the home. They were forced to seek possession because the defendant refused to vacate. Judge Callahan's gaze turned to him, and her tone hardened. I've reviewed the exhibits in this file, she said. One of them is a deed. My throat went tight. Judge Callahan lifted a single page from the file and held it up. Exhibit B is a recorded quitclaim deed, she said, purporting to transfer the property from Isabel Monroe to Margaret and Vincent Monroe. Recorded 3 weeks ago. My mother inhaled softly, like she was about to cry. My father's face stayed blank. Judge Callahan looked at me. Miss Monroe, did you sign a quitclaim deed transferring this property to your parents 3 weeks ago? Mr. Hastings' voice came in smooth and confident. Your Honor, we have a notarized deed on public record. Judge Callahan's eyes snapped to him. I didn't ask you, counsel. Then she looked back at me. You're saying this deed is fraudulent? Yes, Your Honor, I said. And I can prove I wasn't present for any notarization. I was at work that day. My employer has badge access logs and security footage. Judge Callahan's pen stopped moving. Access logs, she repeated. Yes, Your Honor, I said calmly. Time-stamped entry and exit records. Security camera footage from the parking garage. Mr. Hastings' expression tightened. Your Honor, this is turning into a title dispute. Property issues belong in a different court. Judge Callahan's gaze hardened. This is not a property dispute right now, counsel. This is an unlawful eviction action, filed by individuals claiming to be owners, supported by a deed the defendant claims she never signed, combined with a service return signed by the plaintiff herself at an incorrect address. She paused. Then she said the sentence that made my parents shift uncomfortably in their seats. I am not comfortable enforcing a writ of restitution on this record. Mr. Hastings opened his mouth to object. Judge Callahan cut him off. I will address the stay first, she said. Miss Monroe, do you have proof of current ownership recorded in your name? Yes, Your Honor. I pulled out the recorder's office printout I had requested earlier that morning from the clerk downstairs. My property abstract. Stamped and certified. Judge Callahan took it, scanned it, and her eyebrows rose slightly. This shows the property was transferred to you through your grandmother's estate, she said, reading aloud. Then, it shows a quitclaim deed 3 weeks ago, transferring it to your parents. She looked at me again. And you're denying you signed that quitclaim? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Callahan leaned back slightly and stared at the deed exhibit. Then she looked at the notary block at the bottom of the page. Her eyes narrowed. Mr. Hastings didn't notice quickly enough. My parents did. My mother's shoulders went rigid. Judge Callahan tapped the notary section with her pen. Counsel, she said, whose notary is this? Mr. Hastings blinked. Your Honor, Whose notary? Judge Callahan repeated, sharper this time. Mr. Hastings glanced down at the document. It appears to be a notary named Lydia Torres, Your Honor. Judge Callahan looked at my father. Mr. Monroe, she said, do you know Lydia Torres? My father's mouth opened, then closed. My mother answered for him, her voice thin. She's a friend of ours, Your Honor. Judge Callahan's gaze stayed fixed on them. A friend who notarized a deed transferring your daughter's inherited home to you 3 weeks ago. Mr. Hastings tried again, urgency creeping into his voice. Your Honor, the deed is recorded. It carries a legal presumption of validity. Judge Callahan didn't blink. Presumption is not immunity, counsel. She turned to the bailiff. I'm issuing an emergency stay of the writ of restitution, she said, effective immediately. Notify the sheriff's office. My lungs released a quiet, controlled breath. Judge Callahan continued, her voice crisp and clear. This matter is stayed, pending a full hearing on the motion to set aside the default judgment and a referral for investigation into the legitimacy of this deed. My mother's face tightened. Your Honor, please. Judge Callahan looked at her. Stop talking, she said.
Then the judge looked at me again. Miss Monroe, she said,
I need you to understand something.
if this deed is fraudulent, you need more than an eviction stay. You need to protect your title immediately.
I know, Your Honor, I said. Judge Callahan nodded. Good. Because I'm ordering the county recorder to be notified of a potential fraudulent conveyance. Mr. Hastings' face went pale. And then Judge Callahan added, calm but final. And I'm ordering the notary, Lydia Torres, to appear in person at the next hearing with her official journal. My parents went completely still. My mother's eyes widened. My father's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jump.
Because a notary journal isn't just a story. It's timestamps, signatures, identification numbers, thumbprints in some states. It's evidence that can't be argued away.
Judge Callahan set the file down. Hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9.
Miss Monroe,
Bring your employer's access logs and any other evidence of your whereabouts on the date in question. Plaintiffs will bring the notary and the original deed. If anyone fails to appear, there will be consequences. My mother's lips parted slightly, and for the first time, the mask of concern looked like what it really was. Fear. As the judge left the bench, the bailiff handed Mr. Hastings the stay order to distribute copies. I took mine and walked out of the courtroom without looking at my parents. In the hallway, my phone buzzed. It was Officer Daniels. I answered immediately. I have the stay, I said. His relief was audible. Understood, ma'am. Send me a photo of the signed order, and I'll notify the civil unit. We'll stand down. I'm sending it now, I said.
I took a clear photo and texted it to him.
Then as I turned toward the stairs, I heard my mother's voice behind me. Low, urgent, no longer sweet. She hissed. You have no idea what you just started.
I didn't turn around, because I did know.
If that deed was fraudulent, this wasn't about eviction anymore. This was about how far my parents were willing to go to steal a dead woman's gift to her granddaughter. And tomorrow, with that notary journal sitting on a courtroom table, we were going to find out exactly what they had done. I didn't go home right away, not because I was afraid to be in my own house, but because I was finished letting my parents control the situation. After I texted the stay order to Officer Daniels, I called the sheriff's civil unit and asked them to confirm they had received it. The dispatcher's voice was clipped and professional. Yes, ma'am, we have the stay on file. Enforcement has been suspended. Then I did the next thing, quietly and without asking anyone's permission. I drove straight to the county recorder's office. It was mid-morning by then, and the waiting room smelled like old paper and recycled air.
People sat in plastic chairs holding marriage licenses, property deeds, and lien releases.
No drama, just paperwork. I took a number and waited. When my number was called, I stepped up to the counter and slid my ID forward, along with the property abstract showing both deeds. My grandmother's estate distribution and the newer quitclaim that supposedly transferred the house back to my parents. I need to file a fraud alert on my property, I said. A judge issued a stay today and referred the deed for investigation. The clerk behind the counter, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and hair pulled into a tight bun, looked at the deed number and typed. Her expression changed almost immediately. Ma'am, she said, this quitclaim was recorded 3 weeks ago. Yes, I said. It was submitted in person with a notary acknowledgement. I kept my voice calm and steady. I did not sign it. A judge has ordered the notary to appear tomorrow with her journal. The clerk didn't respond with sympathy. She responded with procedure. Do you have the case number? I gave it to her. She typed it into a notes field and printed a form. Fill this out, she said. We'll attach a fraud alert flag to the property record. It doesn't invalidate the deed automatically, she added. but it places a public notice that ownership is disputed. It can also trigger additional verification if someone tries to record more documents on the property. That was exactly what I needed. I signed the form in my normal handwriting, slow and deliberate, and slid it back to her. The clerk stamped it and added it to the file. Then she did something that made Wes's stomach clench again. She clicked into the deed's digital image and zoomed in on the notary block. "Can I ask you a question?" she said carefully. Yes. She tapped the screen lightly with her pen. "Do you know why the notary commission number looks unusual?" My throat tightened. She rotated the monitor slightly so I could see. The notary commission number had one digit scratched out and rewritten. A tiny correction, almost invisible unless you were specifically trained to notice filing irregularities. "That kind of correction should have triggered a rejection during intake," she said quietly. But it didn't. It went through. I stared at the screen and felt my anger crystallize into something sharp and focused. A scratched-out digit on a legal acknowledgement isn't a typo. It's a red flag. "Can you print that image for me?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes. And I'll print the intake metadata as well." When she handed me the pages, they were still warm from the printer and stamped official. Exactly what my parents couldn't argue with later. I left the recorder's office with the fraud alert confirmation in my bag and drove home, my mind running through every possible angle, like a machine built for survival. If the deed was forged, there were only a few ways it could have been recorded. A notary who lied about witnessing my signature, a signature that wasn't actually mine, an ID that was either fake or belonged to someone else. My parents had counted on me being too shocked to move, too afraid to fight. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as it always did. Quiet, normal, sunlight reflecting off the windows, but my parents' car was parked across the street again, still watching. I didn't give them the performance they were waiting for. I walked into my house, locked the door behind me, and went straight to the kitchen table. Then I did what they never expected me to do. I called my employer. Not to complain, not to cry. To request documentation. The company's security office answered on the second ring. "Security," a man's voice said. "This is Isabel Monroe," I replied. "I need to request badge access logs and security footage for 3 weeks ago. Specifically, the entire day of the 19th. There was a brief pause. "May I ask why?" "Because a legal document was filed claiming I signed it in front of a notary that day," I said calmly. "And I need to prove where I actually was." The tone on the other end shifted immediately. "Understood," he said. "I'll need a formal email request and a case number if you have one." "I have one," I said, and I gave it to him. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. He said, "We'll pull your badge entries and parking gate scans. If the security footage is still archived, we'll preserve it." Preserve. That word felt like protection, wrapped in official language. When I ended the call, I looked out the front window. My mother was standing on the sidewalk now, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like she was trying to manage her impatience. My father stood with his arms crossed, staring at my house like it owed him something. Then my doorbell rang. Once. When I didn't answer, it rang again. I didn't move toward the door. I moved toward my phone. I opened the camera app and started recording, holding it low, capturing the timestamp and the audio. Then I walked to the door and spoke through it without unlocking anything. "Yes." My mother's voice came through the wood, sharp and tight. "Open the door, Isabel." "No," I said. My father's voice followed, controlled and cold. "We're here to resolve this like adults." I kept my tone flat. "You filed an eviction against me. You forged a lease. You recorded a deed I never signed. That's not resolving anything. That's fraud." My mother's voice rose. I didn't answer that. Instead, I asked a question. "Why did you do it?" Silence. Then my father spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Because your grandmother promised that house would stay in the family," he said. "And you were making decisions we didn't approve of." I felt my jaw tighten. "I am the family," I said. My mother's voice turned sharp and bitter. "You're selfish. That woman would have wanted us to have it." I exhaled slowly. "She didn't want that," I said. "That's why the deed is in my name." My father's voice dropped even lower, like a warning. Tomorrow the notary will confirm you signed. I didn't flinch.
Then tomorrow she'll have to produce her journal, I said. And it will show exactly what she verified.
Or didn't. My mother's voice went sweet again.
Too sweet. You don't want to destroy people's lives over paperwork, Isabel. That sentence told me everything I needed to know.
They were afraid of what the paper trail would reveal about how they tried to steal it. I kept my voice quiet and calm. You already made that choice, I said. I'm just making sure it's documented properly. Then I ended the conversation the same way I ended every conversation with people trying to manipulate a moment. I stopped talking. Outside I heard my mother inhale sharply, then exhale with forced composure. Fine, she said through the door. We'll see you in court. Their footsteps retreated. I didn't stop recording until I heard their car doors slam shut.
40 minutes later, my email pinged. The subject line read, Badge Access Logs. Isabel Monroe, requested date.
I opened the attachment and there it was, in clean, undeniable detail. Entry time, exit time, internal door access timestamps, parking gate scans. The log showed me entering the building that morning at 7:53 and not leaving until after 6 in the evening. No time to drive across town, sit in front of a notary, sign a deed, and return unnoticed. Then another email arrived, this one from the county recorder's office. Subject: Fraud alert confirmation and parcel record image. Attached were the official fraud alert placement notice and the printed image of the deed, showing the scratched-out notary commission digit. I printed everything and stacked the documents on my kitchen table like I was building a fortress out of facts. Because tomorrow wasn't going to be about what my parents claimed happened. It was going to be about what the notary's journal could prove, or couldn't. And just before I closed my laptop for the night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. One sentence: If you show up tomorrow, you'll regret it. My skin went cold, not because I was frightened. Because threats meant they knew what was coming, and they didn't think they could stop it any other way. I didn't reply to the unknown number. I took a screenshot of the message, saved it to a folder labeled with the case number, and forwarded it to my own email with the subject line, Threat received, night before hearing. Then I did the simplest and most important thing I could do. I went to sleep. Not peacefully, not easily. But I forced my body to rest, because exhaustion makes people careless. And my parents had built their entire strategy around me being too tired, too shocked, too isolated to fight back. At 8:30 the next morning, I walked back into courtroom 6, carrying a single folder and wearing a calm expression. My parents were already seated with their attorney. My mother had changed into a different sweater, like she thought wardrobe adjustments could reset the narrative. My father looked impatient, his jaw set, his eyes locked on the bench, like he was waiting for permission to reclaim what he had decided was his. And, sitting behind them, stiff and uncomfortable, clutching her purse like a shield, was the notary, Lydia Torres. She looked nothing like I had imagined. Not smug, not confident, just tense, like she had been told to appear and repeat a script, and she was desperately hoping no one would ask the wrong questions. When the bailiff called the case, Judge Callahan took the bench with the same sharp, focused expression she had worn the day before. Only now it looked less patient. "Good morning," she said. "We are here on the defendant's motion to set aside the default judgment, and this court's concern regarding a recorded quitclaim deed submitted as evidence." She looked directly at Mr. Hastings. "Counsel, do you have the original deed?" Mr. Hastings stood. "Yes, Your Honor." He held up a manila folder like it was sacred. Judge Callahan turned her gaze to the notary. "Miss Torres," she said, "you are a commissioned notary public in this state." "Yes, Your Honor," Lydia answered. Her voice was thin and unsteady. "And you notarized a deed transferring property from Isabel Monroe to Margaret and Vincent Monroe on the 19th of last month. Correct?" Lydia swallowed visibly. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Callahan's voice stayed calm and measured. Then you will produce your notary journal for the court's review. Lydia hesitated for just a fraction of a second.
Mr. Hastings spoke quickly.
Your Honor, the notarization was performed in full compliance with state law. The acknowledgement is complete and properly executed.
The journal is not necessary for.
Judge Callahan looked at him like he had just suggested she ignore the foundation of her courtroom. Sit down, counsel, she said. Mr. Hastings sat. Judge Callahan kept her eyes on Lydia. Your journal, now. Lydia's hands shook as she opened her purse. She pulled out a small black book with a worn cover and handed it to the bailiff like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The bailiff carried it to the judge. Judge Callahan opened the journal, and the courtroom went silent in that specific way that makes every breath audible. She ran her finger down the entries, then stopped. She looked up. Miss Torres, she said evenly, please tell the court what form of identification you verified for Isabel Monroe on the 19th. Lydia blinked rapidly. Her driver's license, Your Honor. Judge Callahan looked back down at the journal. Your entry lists a driver's license number ending in 492. My stomach tightened. My license didn't end in 492. Judge Callahan lifted her eyes again. Miss Monroe, she said, what are the last 3 digits of your driver's license number? I answered without hesitation. 806. Then she looked at Lydia, and the calm in her voice became something sharper. So the journal does not match the defendant's actual license number, she said. Explain. Lydia's lips parted and closed. Her eyes flicked toward my parents, just once, so brief most people would have missed it. But Judge Callahan didn't miss anything. Mr. Hastings stood again, too quickly. Your Honor, journals can contain clerical errors. Typographical mistakes are. Judge Callahan cut him off. Enough, counsel. She turned the journal slightly and read the next line aloud into the record. This entry lists the signer as Isabel Monroe, she said, and under the signature line, there is a scrawl that does not remotely resemble the signature on any of the defendant's court filings. She turned her gaze to Lydia. Miss Torres, did you personally witness Isabel Monroe sign this deed in your presence? Lydia's voice came out strained and barely audible. Judge Callahan didn't raise her voice. She simply reached for the documents I had submitted the day before, my employer's badge access logs, and she held them up for the courtroom to see. Miss Monroe, she said, you stated under penalty of perjury that you were at your place of employment for the entire day in question. Yes, Your Honor, I said. Do you have documentation proving you were physically present at that location? Yes, Your Honor. I slid the badge logs and the security office email forward. Then I added the time-stamped parking gate scan, showing my vehicle entering and remaining in the controlled garage. Judge Callahan scanned the first page, then the second.
Her eyes narrowed at the timestamps. Then she looked directly at Lydia.
Miss Torres, she said, at what time did you notarize this deed? Lydia swallowed hard. Around noon, Your Honor. Judge Callahan turned back to the access log.
The defendant's badge log shows her inside a secured office building at noon, she said, with internal door access recorded. Her parking gate log shows her vehicle inside a controlled parking structure. She did not leave the premises. Lydia's face went pale. Her voice cracked. Maybe it was later in the day, Your Honor. Judge Callahan flipped the journal page again. Your journal entry lists the time as 12:20, she said. So no, Miss Torres. Not later. Mr. Hastings looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. My mother's hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. My father stared straight ahead, as if refusing to acknowledge the evidence would somehow make it stop existing. Judge Callahan set the journal down slowly and leaned forward slightly. Miss Torres, she said, are you familiar with the legal consequences of notarizing a signature you did not personally witness? Yes, Your Honor. Then I'm going to ask you one final time, Judge Callahan said. Her voice was quiet, but unyielding. Did you personally witness Isabel Monroe sign this deed?
Lydia's mouth trembled. Her eyes darted once more to my parents. My mother shook her head, a tiny, desperate movement. My father didn't move at all. Lydia exhaled a shaky breath, and when she spoke, the lie finally collapsed under its own weight. "No," she whispered. "I didn't." The courtroom didn't explode into chaos.
It just reset, like truth had flipped a switch, and everything in the room was now running on a different current.
Judge Callahan's voice turned cold and precise. "Thank you, Miss Torres," she said. "That is all." My mother made a small choking sound, half gasp, half anger, then clamped her mouth shut like she suddenly remembered there were recordings. Mr. Hastings stood again, his voice cracking with desperation. "Your Honor, this goes far beyond the scope of—" Judge Callahan raised her hand. "Sit down, counsel." He sat. Judge Callahan looked at my parents. "Margaret Monroe," she said. "Vincent Monroe, stand up." They stood slowly, like gravity had shifted. Judge Callahan spoke in a tone that didn't need volume to carry weight. "This court is vacating the default judgment," she said. "The writ of restitution is dissolved. The unlawful eviction case is dismissed for lack of proper service and lack of standing." My father's mouth opened slightly. Judge Callahan kept going. "This court is referring the quitclaim deed to the district attorney's office for investigation of fraudulent conveyance and conspiracy, and I am referring the notary to the state commissioning authority for potential license revocation." My mother's eyes went wide. "Your Honor, please." Judge Callahan's gaze cut her off instantly. "No," she said. "Miss Monroe," she said, "you will obtain a certified copy of today's order and record it with the county recorder immediately. You will also pursue correction of your title through the appropriate civil process. And based on what I have seen here today, you should strongly consider filing for an emergency protective order as well." "I will, Your Honor," I said. Judge Callahan nodded. "And if either plaintiff attempts any further action to interfere with your possession of that property, you are to contact law enforcement immediately. This court's orders are not suggestions. They are enforceable by contempt."
Mr. Hastings was speaking to them in rapid,
Hushed tones, like he was trying to get them out of the building before someone decided to detain them. Lydia Torres walked in the opposite direction, her face pale, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And I went straight downstairs to the clerk's office to request certified copies of the judge's order. The stamps came down hard, one after another. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Certified, certified, certified. Then I drove directly to the county recorder's office and filed the judge's order against the property record, attaching it to the fraud alert that was already in place. The clerk who had helped me before didn't smile when she saw the judge's signature. She just gave me a single firm nod, like she had been waiting for the system to catch up to the truth. On my way out of the building, my phone buzzed. Another unknown number, another text. This one was even shorter than the last.
"Just forget it. I took a screenshot anyway."
Because people like my parents don't stop because they suddenly develop a conscience. They stop because the doors close and lock behind them. Over the following weeks, I watched the consequences unfold without needing to chase them. The recorder's office confirmed that the fraudulent deed was flagged and under official investigation. The notary's license went under review by the state authority. My employer's security team preserved the footage of me entering the building that morning and never leaving. The sheriff's civil unit updated their system with the stay order and the dismissal, so no one could ever show up at my door again with forged papers and call it routine. And my parents, the people who had spent my entire life telling me that family loyalty was everything, couldn't look me in the eye without seeing their own signatures on a documented lie. They never apologized. They didn't have the emotional capacity for accountability. My mother sent a single email a week later, trying to reframe the entire situation as a misunderstanding. My father didn't send anything at all. But I didn't need apologies. I needed my house, and I needed my grandmother's gift to stay exactly where she had put it. With me, the person she had trusted. One quiet evening, I stood in my living room and looked at the sunlight streaming through the windows. The same windows my parents had tried to steal by walking into a courthouse with forged documents and a complicit notary. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The kind of steady you earn when you stop begging people to treat you fairly and start forcing them to deal with facts. A few weeks later, the neighborhood felt normal again. No sheriff's car at my curb. No parents standing across the street, watching like predators. The fraud alert remained on the property record until the formal title correction process was completed. And every official letter that arrived went into the same folder, labeled with the case number and stored in my fireproof lockbox. I replaced the front door lock. I installed a video doorbell. I kept certified copies of the judge's order in multiple secure locations. Not because I wanted to live in fear, but because I wanted to live in reality. My parents had proven they would weaponize institutions to get what they wanted. I had learned to use those same institutions as shields. If your parents tried to evict you from a house your grandmother left you, would you confront them first, or would you do exactly what I did and let the legal record trap them in their own lie? Tell me in the comments. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful exactly, but stable in a way I hadn't felt in years. The kind of stability that comes from knowing the foundation beneath you is solid, documented, and legally protected. I went back to work. I paid my bills. I tended the garden my grandmother and I had planted together. And every time I walked through my front door, I felt the weight of what I had fought for settle around me like armor. But stability doesn't mean the past disappears. It just means you've learned how to live with it without letting it control you. My parents never contacted me directly after that final court hearing. No phone calls, no surprise visits, no more texts from unknown numbers. But I knew they hadn't vanished. Small towns have ways of keeping everyone within arm's reach, whether you want them there or not. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my mother had started telling people I had turned against the family, that I was ungrateful, that I had misunderstood their intentions. The narrative she was spinning was predictable. She was the wounded mother. My father was the disappointed parent. And I was the difficult daughter who had chosen legal action over reconciliation. I didn't defend myself in whispered conversations at the grocery store or the post office, because the people who mattered already knew the truth, and the people who didn't wouldn't believe me anyway. But then something shifted. It started small. A former co-worker of my grandmother's reached out to me through social media. She said she had heard what happened, not from my parents, but from someone at the courthouse who had seen the case file. She told me she wasn't surprised. She said my grandmother had once confided in her that she worried my parents would try to take the house after she was gone. That message sat with me for days. My grandmother had known, she had seen it coming, and she had still trusted me enough to leave me the house anyway, knowing I would have to fight for it. A week later, another message came, this time from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She told me my parents had tried something similar with her after her father passed away. They had claimed he owed them money. They had produced a fake promissory note. She had been too exhausted to fight it and had just paid them to make it go away. She said she wished she had done what I did. She wished she had let the system expose them. I realized then that this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. My parents were people who saw family inheritance as an opportunity, not a responsibility. And I had been the first person in the family to call it what it was: fraud. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me sad. Sad for my grandmother who had worked so hard to leave something meaningful behind. Sad for my cousin who had been bullied into silence. Sad for every person who had ever been manipulated by people who used the word family like a weapon. I started keeping a private record of every story that came my way, every message, every detail. Not because I planned to do anything with it, but because I wanted to remember that I wasn't alone, that what happened to me wasn't unique,
and that silence protects the wrong people. Then one afternoon, about 4 months after the final hearing, I received a certified letter in the mail. My stomach clenched when I saw the return address. It was from a law office I didn't recognize. I opened it carefully, my hands steady, but my heart pounding. Inside was a single-page letter. It was from an attorney representing Lydia Torres, the notary. The letter stated that Miss Torres was facing disciplinary action from the State Notary Commission and potential criminal charges related to the fraudulent deed. It said she was willing to provide a formal written statement, under oath, detailing exactly how my parents had approached her, what they had asked her to do, and how much they had paid her to notarize a document without my presence. The letter ended with a question. Would I be willing to meet with Miss Torres and her attorney to discuss her cooperation in any further legal proceedings against my parents? I read the letter 3 times. Then I called the attorney's office. The conversation was brief and professional. The attorney explained that Lydia was facing the possibility of losing her notary commission and being charged with a misdemeanor. She wanted to mitigate her situation by being fully transparent. She was willing to testify. She was willing to provide bank records showing the payment my parents had made to her. She was willing to admit everything. I agreed to meet. She had made a choice, and that choice had nearly cost me my home. But because her testimony could protect other people, it could create a record that couldn't be ignored or rewritten. The meeting took place in a small conference room at the attorney's office. Lydia sat across from me, looking older and smaller than she had in the courtroom. Her hands were folded on the table. Her eyes were red. Her attorney sat beside her, calm and professional. I sat across from them with a notebook and a pen. Lydia's attorney started by outlining what his client was prepared to do. Provide a sworn affidavit, turn over financial records, testify in any criminal or civil proceeding if subpoenaed. Then he looked at me. Miss Monroe, he said, my client wants to apologize to you directly. I looked at Lydia. She swallowed hard and met my eyes. I'm so sorry, she said. Her voice was shaky but sincere. I should never have done it. She trailed off, struggling. I just needed the money, and they made it sound like you had agreed, like it was just a formality. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence sit there, heavy and uncomfortable. Then I spoke. They lied to you, I said, and you chose to believe them because it was easier than asking questions. Lydia nodded, tears spilling over. I know, she whispered. I know. Her attorney cleared his throat gently. Miss Monroe, Lydia is prepared to provide you with a full account of what happened, if you're willing to hear it. I nodded. I'm listening. Lydia took a shaky breath and began. She told me that my father had contacted her about a month before the deed was recorded. He had told her that I was having financial trouble and that the family was helping me by taking the house into their name temporarily to protect it from creditors. He said I had agreed, but that I was too embarrassed to come to the notary appointment in person. He offered to bring my identification and a signed deed. He said it was urgent. Lydia said she had hesitated at first, but my father had been charming, persuasive. He had brought what looked like my driver's license, though she admitted now that the photo had been slightly blurry. He had brought a deed with a signature that looked plausible. And he had paid her $300 in cash, which was 3 times her usual fee. She said she had told herself it was fine, that families handled things informally all the time, that she was just helping. But deep down, she said, she had known something was off. She had just chosen to ignore it. When she finished, I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. You didn't just ignore it, I said. You enabled it. Lydia nodded miserably. I know. Her attorney leaned forward slightly. Miss Monroe, Lydia is facing serious consequences for her actions. But she wants to make this right in whatever way she can. If there's anything she can do, she will. I looked at Lydia for a long moment. Then I said, you can tell the truth. Everywhere. Every time. In every proceeding. You don't get to protect my parents because you feel guilty. You tell the whole story. I promise. I left that meeting with a signed affidavit,
copies of Lydia's notary journal entries, and bank records showing a $300 cash withdrawal from my father's account the day before the deed was recorded. I also left with something I hadn't expected: a strange, quiet sense of closure. Not because Lydia's apology erased what had happened, but because the truth was now documented in a way my parents couldn't undo.
A few weeks later, I received another letter,
This time from the district attorney's office. They were formally investigating my parents for fraudulent conveyance and conspiracy to commit fraud. They wanted to know if I would be willing to cooperate as a witness. I called the prosecutor assigned to the case. She was direct and professional. She told me that cases like this were difficult to prosecute because they often came down to he said, she said. But this case, she said, was different.
"We have the notary's confession," she explained.
We have the journal entries that don't match your identification. We have your employer's access logs. We have the fraudulent lease. We have your mother signing for service at the wrong address. This is one of the clearest cases of intent I've seen. I asked her what would happen if they were convicted. She said it would likely result in probation, fines, and restitution. Possibly a short jail sentence depending on the judge. But more importantly, she said, it would create a permanent record. A criminal record that would follow them. That would show up in background checks. That would make it much harder for them to do this to someone else.
I agreed to cooperate fully.
Over the next several months, I gave statements. I provided documents. I sat for interviews. And I watched as the case slowly built itself into something undeniable.
My parents hired a new attorney.
They tried to claim they had been misled by Lydia. They tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence didn't support misunderstandings. It supported intent. And when Lydia took the stand during a preliminary hearing and testified under oath about exactly how my father had approached her, the case became unwinnable for them. In the end, my parents took a plea deal. They pled no contest to attempted fraudulent conveyance. They were sentenced to 2 years of probation, ordered to pay restitution for my legal fees and court costs, and required to complete a financial ethics course. They were also permanently barred from making any claim to the property.
The judge made it clear that if they violated probation or attempted any further contact with me, they would face jail time.
I wasn't in the courtroom when the sentence was handed down. I didn't need to be. I received a copy of the order in the mail, certified and stamped. I filed it with the county recorder, attached it to my property record, and placed a copy in my lockbox. And then I moved forward, not by forgetting, but by refusing to let what happened define the rest of my life. I started volunteering at a local legal aid clinic, helping people navigate the kinds of bureaucratic nightmares I had survived. I learned that so many people, especially women, face similar situations. Family members who manipulate paperwork, partners who forge signatures, people who use the legal system as a weapon because they know most people won't fight back. I shared my story carefully, privately, with people who needed to hear it. I told them that the system is slow and frustrating and sometimes cruel, but it can also be a shield if you know how to use it. I told them to document everything, to stay calm, to ask for help, and to never ever let someone convince them that fighting back makes them the villain. One woman I met through the clinic had been served with eviction papers by her ex-husband, who claimed he owned the house they had bought together. She was terrified. She thought she had no options. I sat with her and walked her through the same steps I had taken: how to request records, how to file an emergency motion, how to gather evidence. She won her case, and when she pulled to thank me, her voice shaking with relief, I realized that what my parents had tried to take from me hadn't just been a house. It had been my belief that I deserved to take up space, that I deserved to be treated fairly, that I had the right to fight back. But I had taken that belief back, and now I was helping other people do the same. The house itself changed over time, but in subtle ways. I repainted the living room in a soft gray blue that my grandmother would have loved.
I replaced the old porch light with something brighter and more welcoming. I framed a photo of my grandmother and me in the garden,
and hung it in the hallway where I could see it every day.
The house stopped feeling like a battlefield. It started feeling like a home again.
I even started dating someone I met through a friend. Someone kind and steady, who didn't flinch when I told him the whole story. He didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just listened. And then he said, "You're stronger than most people I know." I didn't feel strong. I just felt like someone who had refused to disappear.
But maybe that's what strength looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your decisions for you. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. It's been 2 years since that morning when Officer Daniels knocked on my door. 2 years since I stood in a courtroom and watched my parents' lives collapse under the weight of evidence. 2 years since I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. The house is still mine. The deed is clear. The fraud alert has been removed. The title is clean. My parents are still on probation. I heard through the grapevine that they moved to another town about an hour away. I don't know if they talk about me. I don't know if they regret what they did. And honestly, I don't care. Because this was never about getting them to admit they were wrong. It was about making sure they couldn't do it again. The legal aid clinic where I volunteer has become a significant part of my life. I've helped dozens of people now. Some of their cases are similar to mine. Others are completely different. But they all have one thing in common. Someone with power tried to use that power to take something that didn't belong to them. And someone else had to fight back. One of the women I worked with recently sent me a message that I keep coming back to. She said, "You taught me that I don't have to be loud to be heard. I just have to be thorough." That sentence means more to me than any thank you ever could. Because it's true. You don't have to scream to be taken seriously. You just have to show up with facts, documentation, and the refusal to be intimidated. I still live in the house my grandmother left me. I still see the sunrise through the kitchen window every morning. I still water the rose bushes we planted together. And every single day, I'm grateful that I didn't let fear or exhaustion or family pressure convince me to walk away. Because this house isn't just 4 walls and a roof. It's proof that I mattered to someone. That my grandmother saw me, trusted me, and believed I was strong enough to protect what she left behind. And she was right. I've thought a lot about what I would say to someone facing a similar situation. Someone whose family is trying to manipulate the legal system. Someone who feels alone and overwhelmed. I would say this: document everything. Every conversation, every text, every email, every piece of paper. Take photos, save receipts, create a timeline, build a record that can't be argued with. Stay calm, even when the other side is trying to provoke you. Emotional reactions give them ammunition. Cold, factual responses give you power. Ask for help. Find a legal aid clinic. Talk to a lawyer. Reach out to advocacy groups. You don't have to do this alone, and you shouldn't. And most importantly, remember that you deserve to take up space. You deserve to be treated fairly. You deserve to fight back. The system is slow. It's frustrating. It's not always just. But it can work if you refuse to give up. My parents taught me a lot of things, though not in the way they intended. They taught me that cruelty can wear a mask of concern, that people will lie to your face and call it love, that institutions can be weaponized by anyone who knows how to fill out the right forms. But they also taught me something they didn't mean to. They taught me that I'm capable of standing alone, of staying calm under pressure, of turning pain into strategy. And I'll carry those lessons with me for the rest of my life. Not as wounds, but as armor. So if you're out there right now, facing something similar, know this: you are not as powerless as they want you to believe. You are not as alone as it feels. And you are absolutely capable of fighting back and winning. It won't be easy, it won't be quick, but it will be worth it. Because at the end of the day, the truth has a weight that lies can't match. And if you're willing to carry that truth all the way to the finish line, you will walk out the other side, still standing, still whole, still you. And no one, not even family, can take that away from you. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel.
and tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. This is my story, but it doesn't have to be yours. Learn from it. Let it remind you that you deserve better, that you are worth fighting for, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to disappear. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And thank you for believing that a woman's voice, when it speaks the truth, can be the most powerful thing in the room.